Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Ghostwrite Mike, who is live from the Valley State Prison in California. He's an incarcerated Vanguard carceral journalist fellow who writes about social justice issues, develops carceral programming for the nonprofit Ben Free Project, and sits on the board of directors of Radical Reversal. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, David. It's a real honor to have this opportunity to chop it up with you for Everyday Injustice. And to all those that will be listening to this on the Adobo app, it's 90,000 in California and more than 400 U.S. jails and penitentiaries. On behalf of that community, I appreciate the invitation.
What inspired you to start writing from prison, basically?
Well, if you let me take a step back, I think a lot of this comes from being a kid. You know, when I was little, I used to post up in the public library and lay these tracing paper sheets over the old school Alfred E. Newman Mad magazine characters. I got pretty good at drawing exaggerated anatomy, and I started creating these caricature versions of some of the crazier people that zigzag in and out of my mama's world of prostitution and heroin. She turned tricks out of the van that we lived in, and that chaos that came with that made for a pretty gnarly visual diary of these homemade comic strip panels I was plugging all these people into. And I was giving them dialogue I was too afraid to say to anybody out loud. And I think that hypervigilance and all those things that I observed, just me trying to get my hands around something in order to control it, because so much of what was happening around me then was dangerous and haphazard. There was no predictability about anything, you know, except for how everybody was always high, crooked as hell, and violent, a lot like prison. And inventing those archetypes as a kid, and try to befriend the fractured and redacted parts of me that nobody really parented, protected, or plugged us into, kind of is still alive in this adult that you're talking to who's moving through this crazy place called prison, still observing and paying attention and trying to make sense of it. And along that way, that exaggerated way of visualizing and framing things kind of, fell in love with the marriage of hip hop and rap music, and how that kind of has always been my language of how I see the world and talk about it. And that kind of became a battle rapping, poetry filled, narcissistic, arrogant, sublimated, hyperventive spitting narration going on in my head about everything that I encounter. So the way of being a comic book consumer and the quick visual punchy dialogue of that kind of married with this abbreviated way of me interacting with the world. And I've slowly been moving into this appreciation for humans, experience, the things I see, making order, or trying to create some order out of the chaos that I see around me. I wasn't trying to stretch descriptions out over chapters. I was trying to shove as many months of real life chaos as I could into 16 bars. And I did pay a price. I hated reading as a kid. I was just too impatient. The world was moving too fast around me. And I paid a price for falling in love with animation and minimalism. And I missed the magic of all those choose your own adventure books until, Dungeons and Dragons got a hold of me. The Elfstones of Shannara was like the first legit book I ever read front to back. And being in prison is a lot like seeing imaginative creations that you find in a comic book or an animated film, because the people in prison are just not like normal people. And I think poetry and our Bars Behind Bars workshop that I co-founded kind of became this way of converting angst, fear, and repressed trauma into what's become a 30-year rhyme book journal that now is kind of like an old school Dewey Decimal System card catalog of writing prompts. So I'm not classically trained. I'm just a dude in prison that's seeing a bunch of chaos and drawing upon this very minimal appreciation for how to order my thoughts and talk about the world that I'm in. Started with comic books, poetry, verses, rapping, and now what has become this attempt to really construct story and convey something that a lot of people in the world don't pay attention to. And the social justice work that we're doing with the Vanguard Carceral Journalism Guild and the Witness platform is really just an outgrowth of that workshop community. Ghost is just a cutout playing DJ in this arena of ideas, just trying to hit you with a mashup of unique subject matter. I used to say that if we could slap palms over 808, I'd be content. I call it journalism because that's what hip hop is, like Adam Bradley. But we're really just curating these articles with the sliced edges of perspectives taken from sessions with 100 different anonymized dudes you won't ever hear about, but who've been barbershop debating these ideas on the tier in prisons for years. And so it's kind of become this democratized sort of writer's room where we purposefully erected and made it a point to defer to this community in arriving at the result. It's really a community project in the truest sense. I'm just a messenger.
So in recent years, we've seen kind of this explosion of prison journalism again. And I really want to understand why that is, but also what exactly is prison journalism?
Well, that's a complicated, dicey conversation, but I'll give it a shot. So it's an oxymoron, right? Because in a strict sense, journalism is free speech. In the carceral context, it's supposed to interrogate the power structures of the government and amplify the human rights imperative of those being confined. It's literally about the intersection of state power and a most vulnerable population. That's us. Subsisting and resisting under the control of that power. We are the subject matter. So for there to be any real examination of what's happening at that very busy intersection, that's an intersection that implicates, nearly 2 million citizens that are colonized in city, county, state, and federal systems of commodification, and there's many millions more still chained to this invisible prison structure of probation and parole supervision. So there's got to be an autopsy performed upon this thing, this Leviathan corpus. And somebody's got to roll that mammoth body over and, stick a thermometer in it in order to get the time of death, because that's what prison is. It's civil death. So we're talking about a body that literally has armed guards and gun towers and razor wired walls all around it, designed to keep people like you, the public, distanced from its shadow reality. Every measure of censorship and impediment that's devised to restrict our ability to even be witnesses to our own lives are like layers of yellow crime scene tape. They're just intended to keep the reporters far enough away from the facts that might reveal what happens here, blur what we can see, and limit the public conveyance of that first-person perspective, because that's what gives authenticity to our testimony. There's a lot to unpack there, but in a very basic way of looking at it, carceral journalism is really our community's history in the making. It's an ethnograph. It's about carceral studies. It's convict criminology. It's community action. It's people power, artivism, abolition. It's witnessing from the margin. It's a living and breathing digital humanities project that could be anchored and should be anchored at a university library near you. It's a poetry slam. It's a human rights mixtape. It's a We Are Here audiobook. It's a Tell Your Story podcast. It's a My Teachable Moment documentary. It's a BIPOC love letter. And it's a live from the pen, public-facing, no-filter, no-cut byline like the one we have. It's enabling philanthropy. It's concerned academia. It's accessible publishing. It's a peer-facilitated community triage. It's a look in the mirror confession. It's tell us the truth interrogation. And it's a most necessary two-way street civic engagement mission that, doesn't just normalize our societal participation in the outside manner that resists the civil death prisons were designed to deliver, but it also, in its best form, circles the feedback loop of outside-in engagements, delivering nourishment back into our community for their consumption, for our consumption. And that's the piece that's really missing. It's a revolutionary undertaking when it's truly enabled and engaged in. Sadly, there's not enough of it. It's how we elevate from booking photo to having our humanity restored. It's how we get to post-carceral. It's how we shapeshift from inmate, convict, prisoner, felon to student, mentor, citizen. Be we confined or returning. It's how and where we have conversations about this man-made paradigm of human control that's called the carceral state. Most people haven't even heard of that term. They don't know what it is. They think it's just a prison. They have no idea about how it was formed. It's about dissecting all of its bloody legacies, discerning what its objectives are, examining what its consequences have been relative to those stated objectives. And it's how we find out about being stamped from the beginning and what that means. What we learn about ourselves as we ride in an elevator with a Jason Reynolds character. Who's that? And what a John Murillo poem can teach you about reclamation, because that's what's happening to our kids who become our young adults, who exit as our old men, and who are in the park next to you. But most importantly, and this is really everything, it's about who gets to participate in those conversations, David. Being marginalized isn't just about the voodoo Death Star of the state, what it does or doesn't do to us. It's not just a complaint form, or what it does or doesn't permit us to do, because we're not asking for permission. It's not always just about assailing the stormtroopers. It's about those non-state actors, folks that are making a living speaking, writing, performing, teaching, and publishing about this carceral paradigm, and who too often leave us on an island by ourselves without coming into port. I'm on your podcast right now from the cell. I'm using the DLC issue tablet-enabled phone app. It's monitored but completely above board. We're having a conversation that will become transcribed and housed at the American Prison Writing Archive at Johns Hopkins University. Shout out to Doran Larson and Mellon. And it'll live on Vanguard's public-facing platform. It'll be embedded in the Everyday Injustice SoundCloud player. It'll be available for on-demand consumption, at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. But real talk, that's not enough, because the most important aspect of what you and I are doing right now will be the part of this feedback loop the public doesn't care so much about, and that your advertisers won't reflexively see value in, all due respect. Because as much as I'm concerned with pushing our narratives from the margin for the free world to see, hear, and read, I'm more concerned about feeding my community the food that is what this conversation and others like it might mean to them, if only they can consume it.
So let me ask you this, because I think a lot of people are wondering this very thing. How do you actually practice journalism under conditions of confinement?
Very carefully. Let me frame something for you. What we're really hunting are engagements with folks who don't currently get to see us connecting with the outside world, and don't get to see the outside world connecting with stakeholders in whatever passes to what they might call prison media. In media, you only see what the world is allowed to see. So there are gatekeepers. Most people have no idea that there are journalists in prison. They can't even imagine how that happens. Austin Reed's book got at what prison takes, but the flip side of that is how time on the cell gives us room for reflection. For me, it's about creating a woven braid of these two very different chapters of trauma that folks in prison contend with. Journalism is about amplifying that, those eras before and during prison that are so common among our community. We're trying to heal that pre-prison trauma while sitting in the active trauma that is prison. It's a crazy judo, but that reconciliation work guides what we're trying to do. And, it really sheds light on this crazy poltergeist-like crucible of becoming that it pulls us all through, whether we want it to or not. Working under the restrictions of being in prison can be dicey. There are a lot of constraints on what we're allowed to do. Right now, we're doing what we're allowed to do. Imagine a goblin at the post office that's opening all your in and outbound mail before you receive it and after you send it, digitally scanning the content and storing the communication in a word searchable database in order to track and query all your columns and associate over time everybody you ever interact with. Overhead cameras, drones, body-worn cameras, facial recognition. That technology is embedded in our life. without tangling, the righteousness of either side of the Middle East conflict in Gaza. That type of carceral surveillance being used against us isn't really any different than how the IDF might deploy red or blue wolf against people in Palestine. The state applies AI surveillance tools to all of our text messages. Everything that we do in this production process is observed. It's banked. It's voice authenticated, auto-transcribed, stored for retrieval. It's a police state, just like you might find in China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and even Ukraine. Anywhere there's an absence of press freedom and a state-run media machine, there's a penetrating top-down surveillance effort that's monitoring citizens for signs of dissent and dissuading liberty. Guantanamo should show you what prison wardens would do if they could get away with it. It's a pretty slippery slope. One of my mentors, President Dwayne Betts, he told the ALA's Tracy Hall in the American Libraries that he never experienced censorship during his bid in Virginia because he didn't have access to a library at all. For 5 of the nearly 9 years he served as a youth offender. He told her, if you have no library, you have no censorship. But for real, I call that a blanket book ban all day, every day. It wasn't this or that book, it was all books. So censorship extends not just to the literature and resources that are allowed into a prison, it applies to the choice of books and periodicals decided upon to be bought with the facility's library funds, as much as it applies to whether any funds are devoted to books for that purpose at all. It also applies to the written, spoken, and creative content that moves in and out of the prison in all of its forms. A letter, a photo, phone call, video visit, or actual visit. It's all manuscript under the law, but too many librarians and DOCs conduct themselves kind of like tag team style. They thwart our access to the very materials that might shape our voices. We need folks like Stephanie Burke standing in the gap and speaking up for us the way she did when she took on her profession in the ALA. She wrote an article, A New Prohibition, Book Banning, Prison Abolition, and Librarians. She's an African Studies librarian at UConn, and she sees these methods of censorship as insidious as we do. There are many invisible hands that move against our ability to function. When they tell you an open source isn't available, that's censorship. When they restrict your ability to communicate with your relative who happens to be confined in another prison, that's censorship. When they don't offer you any books by Black poets on the ebook or audiobook app, that's censorship. When they tell you they won't allow you to publish a prison newspaper or newsletter, that's censorship. When our text messages are restricted by language content filters that block our use of everyday terminology using AI tools that are used indiscriminately against all speech, that's censorship. So it's uphill, it's difficult, it's a crazy sort of judo, but it's worth it because at the end of the day, we are living a massive experience below the radar. And our mission is to normalize our participation. And more so than just normalizing our voice, it's about framing conversations that become brain food for our community. That requires the building of an infrastructure that stands on the shoulders of what you're doing, which is enabling people like me to convey to the public what this life might be like, but do that next thing, which is try to elevate these conversations by engaging with high caliber people and then bringing that conversation back into our community so that our community can be nourished by it. Because my people need to see what normalism looks and sounds like. That can't happen by only having content live outside of the razor wire where we can't see it, touch it, experience it, hear it, and be impacted by it. So the next step in what we're really trying to do is develop that feedback loop. And that's where partners and projects like the Adobe platform become useful. Because right now, I'm speaking to you because in the state of California, we get free phone calls. And they gave us a computer in our hands. It's called a tablet. That tablet lets me send text messages out and it lets me speak to you over the phone. And you're recording the phone conversation. You'll platform it. But there's 90,000 people in California tonight living in a cage who won't be able to hear that conversation unless and until we place it on the Adobo app. And the Adobo app is an application that lives inside of the tablet platform that's accessible to us for free. So when we really start thinking about what these kinds of activities could be for our community, if we're responsible in the way that we question, interrogate, think about, and frame worthwhile conversations with rare, iconic thought leaders in the world, if they reach down to us and engage us, we can do more than just rant and rave about what's screwed up about prison. We can actually become teachers and mentors and facilitate conversations that can benefit our whole community. And that's why I'm in this fight. That's what it's about.
And what do people that are not on the inside need out of this experience?
Well, I think they need an open mind. We're not here to assert that people aren't criminals, that they haven't done terrible things. Super Predator had its time and place. There are a lot of worthwhile concerns that need to be aired. But, you have a captive audience that, is suffering intellectually, emotionally. And for those people that are out in the free world who are naturally empathetic to those who are confined and have a compassionate, what I would call normal capacity to imagine people changing and becoming better versions of themselves, where prison isn't just this cage of retribution, but it is opportunity to be removed from terrible circumstances, to recalibrate, to deconstruct, to be reformed, to develop a real moral capacity to view your role in the world as being peaceful. These are the things that we hope prison accomplishes. In California, they're really trying to do that. I tip my cap. We have a terrible union that just wants more hours and doesn't care about our programming, but we have some incredible humanitarians that are living in the executive suite in Sacramento that are trying to get their hands around this and are willing to travel to Norway and find out how to do it better. Why are recidivism rates so good everywhere else and they just suck in California? We know what those answers are, but we haven't mastered how to deploy a vibrant culture inside of prison that can actually lead to the development of better human beings. We haven't figured that out yet. What has been happening lately is that they've been focusing on the youth offender, that younger carve out, those people that are deemed still salvageable, most salvageable. And that's tied and connected to the brain science that tells us that the brain doesn't completely develop. The executive functions, the prefrontal cortex, that's not a question. There's no debate now. That doesn't end and fully form until about age 25. And that's impacted all of the case law and all of the Supreme Court decisions about whether we put juveniles to death, about whether or not we put them on the shelf for LWOP and never let them get out, or give them programming that allows them to reclaim their humanity and return to civilization anew. We are at that very pivotal fork in the road where this experiment is being road tested. And in California, we need our population, our community, our taxpayer base, those people in the world who know what it's like to drive through certain parts of certain cities and lock your door and be afraid. These kids are coming home. Most people are walking out of prison, even the people that killed somebody. They're coming home. They're not going to stay on the shelf forever. So we need the greatest human effort to give everybody the opportunity to become their best version of self. And if we can do that, we can make a safer community for everybody. And I could spend all day talking about all the programs that work versus those that don't. But what we really need, what answers that question that you posed, is an open mind on the other end. And if you can listen to these kinds of conversations and then take it to the next step. If I can speak to a person who I would never have the opportunity to ever encounter, and we can have a intelligent conversation about how the brain forms and what can be done in spite of bad circumstances to create better outcomes. It's not so much about the public hearing that conversation as it is the public supporting that conversation being redistributed back into the prison. Because right now we have a deficit in one very important area. The system doesn't have enough tools to help those of us that are in the cage. So we have to help ourselves. If you really knew how many of the self-help programs that happen in prison that are actually facilitated by life prisoners, you would kind of blink your eye and tilt your head and think, are the mental patients helping the mental patients? Are the convicts teaching the convicts? Are the prisoners teaching the prisoners? And in many instances, that answer is yes. And the difference maker is the fact that oftentimes your peers are the only people you let influence you. And so it takes exceptional humans. It takes volunteers from the community. It takes business owners and journalists and publishers like you willing to give us enough leash to even be heard. And so we cherish these opportunities. We cherish these moments. We know everybody's watching and everyone's listening. And we only get one chance to fail. We can't screw it up. So we have to be responsible in the way that we talk about what this place is. And we need to not just become exemplars, but we actually have to be responsible for our own peer group, for our own community. The kids that come into the prison system from the county jails are doing what somebody older than them told them to do. And when they get here, they need a different mentor interaction. They need a different role model. And so we need community action for this to happen, because without it, we're just talking to ourselves.
And you mentioned censorship. Why is it so important to be able to be anonymous so that you can't be retaliated against?
Well, yeah, your question didn't bury the lead, that's for sure. It is about retaliation, but it's a little more expansive than that. So incarcerated journalists, those of us with the freedom to actually write and publish without state controls, that's a huge qualifier. And we're an endangered species. There's a real crowbar of retaliation being swung at some of us for doing this work at all. And it's in direct proportion to the rigor of our critique of the system. It's built in power structures and those state actors who low-key pull the levers that adversely impact our quality of life when it happens. So when the Ben Free Project donated 80 copies of PEN America's The Sentences That Create Us, that's a writing guide for incarcerated writers, and we sent it to our facility for our use in our bars workshop. Incredibly and without cause, they were impounded twice. It just disappeared. So PEN's Dr. Marquise wrote advocacy letters twice to our warden, to two different wardens, because we had two wardens come and go in the interval of a few months. And I was threatened with whole time directly after we published the story on your platform with the Vanguard, not because we complained per se, but because we did that extra thing. We named names. So I could have written about those threats and named those names too, but I didn't. We made our point. There'll be a season for those more provocative disclosures when we publish our anthology. Believe that. But now that book is a digital PDF available to all of us as an ebook. Where? On the Adobo app. Only making the impoundment action, more so absurd and baseless. In the end, ironically, I consider that a victory for freedom. We did our job. We called it out. They got exposed. They did what they did to me. And now the book is available to all 90,000 of my brothers and sisters that are living in cages. It's not just in our workshop anymore. But that's what it takes. What we do as anonymized writers is completely counterintuitive to the motivation that most incarcerated writers have to be heard, get paid, and receive personal credit. I'm not dissing anybody else's motivations, but we're outliers in that sense because our journalism isn't designed to amplify us personally at all. In fact, our mission is to divorce our personal circumstances from the content that we want folks to focus on. I seek no acclaim, glory, or credit. All I want is for there to be fluidity and normalcy in our engagement with the free world so that we can present that content, the content that results from those exchanges, as a diet for our peers. Whatever gets us to that place is what I'm about. If we do our job, hopefully another 100 digital news platforms like the Vanguard around the country will start inviting a couple of folks like us to present their carceral perspectives too. We're creating a proof of concept in that direction every day. And let's not be shy about it. We're already gaslit by ad hominems thrown from all sides for simply having the audacity to be speaking at all. Legacy journalists don't think we belong. Mainstream outlets aren't particularly inviting to our ilk. I salute Emily and Rasan of Empowerment Avenue for bringing bridges and installing them so folks like us can be plugged into mainstream portals, because conservatives salivate over the chance to deride liberal media friendlies who might give us any amplification at all. And I know our public-facing content positioning actually threatens the prison newspaper establishment too, because our very existence reveals, David, all of them to be more state-controlled PR than news. And then you have the nonprofits who posture as journalism mentors who, truth be told, don't put our work where our community can even see it. And they get revealed as transactional grant chasers, not so much the humanitarians they like to post up at galas and give themselves awards for. But the real deal is there's also a legitimate victim advocacy perspective that lurks in the shadows, and I would say rightfully so, waiting to spew dated vengeance into every situation that portrays any of us in any way as human, temperate, capable of being more than a prisoner. And that's designed to steal our transformation from us. So tactically, why give them a larger target? See, anonymization takes the focus off the messenger, and it really just centers the argument. A lot like how prison debate teams might be able to best their Ivy League competitors, but that only happens after everybody's gotten over their lauded pedigrees, and they just accept how they all got into the room together, right? Like, you can't naysay us because of our past if you have to contend with our now. So we just choose up front. We shed the dead weight and we eliminate the distractions that serve to further marginalize our content long after it's published. See, this is what everyone needs to really pay attention to. We're not here to convince the public of anything or stand in a line the mainstream gatekeepers have formed for us in order to be heard at all. We're already resetting these colonial rules that for too long have barred entry to those who become the story only when their minders say they can, and only become allowed to play storyteller after they've emerged, earned an MFA, and passed somebody else's inspection. That whole paradigm is dead, David. The University of North Carolina's Southern Cultures anonymized the representative of jailhouse lawyers speak. That's a carceral rights organizing movement funded by the Mellon Foundation that we support. And they did that in order to center their work and its abolitionist philosophy within a literary journal without retaliation. Columbia University's School of the Arts MFA Society published our anonymized work in its own literary magazine, Exchange, as will Virginia Commonwealth University's Journal of Prison Education and Research when it publishes my teaching artist practitioner paper about our bars workshop. So there's plenty of precedent for carceral activists working, writing, and being interviewed behind the veil of anonymity. It doesn't render our content any less real, and most importantly, it doesn't allow critics to avoid the substance of our work. See, this is personal for me. You can't lobby for the redemptive power of a liberal arts education in our prisons. Give it to us. Teach us in our critical thinking and logic classes about proper argumentation, implore us to avoid fallacious reasoning, trying to get our minds right so we become better citizens, and then get upset when we remove your favorite ad hominem tactic from the equation by which you try to poison pill our participation in the media landscape in the first damn place. One of my most creative, empathetic, and thoughtful workshop youth offender mentees, David, he's a skinny little white boy from the Bay Area who can recite Baraka like a rattlesnake. Does your audience know who Baraka is? Perform an August Wilson scene that'll make a grown man cry, and he tours delinquent teens through our prison to dissuade them from crime. He shot his entire family, and then he burned down the family home with all of them laying dead inside of it, only after enduring years of physical abuse that was documented but ignored by CPS. He was born to write, David. He's an absolute true vessel of pain, trauma, suicidality, empathy, art, and the change we hope to see in our youngest folks who we put on the shelf for 3 decades. I'm not going to create or co-sign any sort of public flogging litmus test for him or any other person in this human aquarium who wants to contribute to the carceral canon. I refuse to abide any kind of marginalizing metric that keeps our community silent about carceral life. Nobody is going to tell us who has a chance to speak, paint, write, spit, sing, or dance. Besides, there's already a broad and time-honored use of pen names in retail publishing that never even gets this question. And there's an even more normalized use of PKAs in the music industry. So for anybody that's like eyeing the podcast, audiobook, music verticals, or let's say mixtapes from prison, if you're not already being creative in how you brand and market your byline, like who's Maserati? Who is Spoon Jackson? They're exactly the people doing what we're doing. And if you're not doing that, you're ignoring an opportunity to create intellectual property, and you're selling yourself short by being hella basic. One thing I'm not is basic. Nearly every dude in our bar's workshop, these are young kids off the porch. These are hood stars. They got 3 or more monikers already tatted on their face, their hands, their neck. We embrace all that. You should too. I can't tell you how many short to the house youth offenders who don't have a life sentence, David. They're going home in 3 years. They're trying to go to college. They've refused to participate in media of any kind. You know why? Because they know they'll be home soon. You know what they fear? They don't want that transition, that very uphill, terrible economy transition, marred by the hyperlink that will prevent their future prospective employer from hiring them. When the Google search reveals the carceral creative content we encouraged them to get down with while they were here, tied to a prison bid they're not trying to publicize. That's ban the box, jumping off the cliff style. That's stupid. So outing yourself to the detriment of your future free world prospects at reentry, that need not be the price of admission one pays in order to participate in the storytelling of our community now. Word to Terrence Hayes, I'm not going to help anybody murder their future's past assassin. If you don't know what that means, dive in a poetry book. On the flip side, and this is really, really critical, the othering of case factor differences, it only serves to shrink the content pool against our already limited storytelling options. And I refuse to avoid telling the story about college achievement, overcoming addiction, being resilient in the face of depression, the power of music therapy, or anything else that gets our people to become better versions of themselves so that they're safer in the groceries market with you, simply because of the unsavory crime this or that person committed. I don't have to lead with that. We can be smart about the way we extract viable, teachable moment, life lesson content from even the most undesirable conduit. I respect everybody in the space, man, who has had to emerge from custody. They've had to lead with their crimes in pursuit of coveted roles in society, who get stiff-armed for it and persevered in spite of it. They had to walk through the fire in order to ascend the heights of their promise. I get it. But that's not the rubric we need to swallow in order to publish the historical record that explores the nuances of carceral life, while our subjects are still confined and unable to control their narratives from a position of freedom. I'm here to curate stories that normalize our humanity in order to prevent both the civil death that awaits us if we stay silent and the stupid-ass suicide we sign ourselves up for if we start picking and choosing who gets to be heard from at all. Like Kate Meisner said, we're already under the underground. They're already standing on our necks. I'm not about to make it any easier for them to marginalize any of us. That's what agency is about. We create the rules of engagement. And this part, we have a lot of mentors in this space who have done this. Nobody wants their work, voice, or perspective eviscerated through the lens of the worst decision made during the most stress-filled moment of their lives. You don't, I don't, nobody does. We already have too many examples of this dead weight felony legacy being wielded against formerly incarcerated folks like Dwayne, Randall Horton, Angel Sanchez, Michelle Jones. But peep game, we're currently incarcerated. We're doing from prison what few of our mentors, those same mentors, were ever able to do while they were locked up themselves. So please, Don't ask me to endorse anything that amounts to a protocol that leads to any semblance of self-censorship. If we don't take the dead weight off the table, it'll scarlet letter every future voice forever. Everyone will be perpetually canceled and the work will remain marginalized. It's not even debatable to me at this point. Anonymization is our superpower. It protects our sources from the same retaliation we face for doing this work. And you already know, we anonymize every resident in our story, David, every time, unless they wish to be demanded. Ours is a safe space of autonomy. We're not going to allow it to become infected by anybody's limiting ideas about how we should imagine the freedom of speech the state doesn't even want us to have. That's crazy. No, we're not doing that. We're not being told what to do, what to say, how to say it. That's not the freedom we imagine. And anybody out there trying to fit us for that sort of waste chain, like Kendrick Lamar said, they really need to just sit down and be humble. We're not asking for your permission to be free. We're alive and we're looking back at you.
And let's wrap up with this question. What does the future of carceral journalism look like from where you sit?
We want to radically change the paradigm by reversing the order of operations. We're not here to be indentured by a facility news program that avails no real freedom. We refuse to be stenographers for the state. We're also not so thirsty just to be heard that we're serving ourselves up to be exploited by external nonprofits formed by folks who never stood for count a day in their lives, who want to monetize our work but never present it back to our community. That's out. And, though we need to be visible in order to be engaging, truth be told, the public isn't necessarily our primary audience. Rather, we want to bring externals into conversations that get pollinated throughout the carceral state where our community can consume them. We want to be that conduit. We want our community to hear directly from folks they otherwise never hear from. Through an outside-in model created by and for us. To do that, we need to be digitally enfranchised, editorially uncensored, and have our work amplified by the power of the caliber of the engagements we seek to have. Because more than anything else, being elevated into relevance by those who agree to reach down to us, that is that thing that stands up for our humanity in a way nothing else really can. War and prison made Etheridge, but Gwendolyn made Etheridge matter. Carceral journalism isn't media talking about us. It isn't state media limiting what we can ask or say. And it's not the nonprofits who fail to deliver us copy autonomy and full circle distribution. It's us being the witnesses who tell our own stories, produce our own curated anthologies, and earn fellowships from the bottom bunk while compiling our own primary source record of what carceral life is. It's about the programmatic legislative rope ladders dropped down into our lives by folks like Scott Budnick, Common, 50 Horsemen, Saul Guy, the departed Michael Latt, Saba and Major, the Creative Acts, everybody at Actors Gang, Dwayne and Freedom Reed, Randall and Devin at Radical Reversal, Carcel and Calvin and Marcel at Rebirth of Sound, Adam at Rap Lab, everybody at Columbia Exchange, Band at Ben Free. And it's what Kim and Khloe Kardashian did when they brought their Hulu cameras and their platform, to create time and space for us inside rooms few folks take a seat in, to talk to folks the public has already forgotten about things most people don't believe we have the capacity or empathy to harness or convey. Whether it's that eye contact that says, hey, I see you, a fist bump, a handshake, a bro hug, sharing a circle to give testimony, a real conversation, or a photo with Kendall Jenner that lands on TMZ and screams out, see, we're all human. When the world looks past our circumstance and just invites us to exist and participate as we are in the now, it allows us to lean into the future that we're trying to actively chase and become. We get that much closer to possibility. I know what 40% of my community being functionally illiterate looks like up close, musty, and not giving a damn about no book. I know what a lack of reading comprehension sounds like. I know what a room full of 28-year-olds who are still in high school feels like. Until those things change, we got work to do. We're well suited for it. Interviews is going to be that thing that raises the bar on what our engagements can look like, because nobody is having conversations like this with folks of this caliber. And that's because of Dwayne. He made this possible in a way nobody else really could. He's like the coaching tree that everybody else comes from. I salute that dude. everything he's brought into our life. Folks like Randall, Mitchell Jackson, Natalie Diaz, and all those somebodies who haven't yet met us, but who might only give us a look in the future because he did. Gratitude, it isn't just an attitude, David. It's a hallmark of empathy, and you got to practice it at full speed. We want to earn those blessings. The future will feature a first ever practitioner paper authored by an incarcerated contributor to be published in Virginia Commonwealth University's Journal of Prison Education Research, describing the work we do in our bars workshop. That's where all this starts from. That's big. The future will feature several of our workshop participants and facilitators appearing on the University of Arizona's Poetry Center podcast and the University of New Haven's Radical Reversal podcast as well. The future will publish our Vanguard archive as PDFs on Adobe for all of our people to digest under the Vanguard Carceral Journalism Guild banner. And that effort will center our long-form interviews, dialogues with folks you don't typically see engaging residents of the carceral state in the media. The future will deliver a carceral graphic novel anthology that will arrive at Comic-Con with industry support of artists, writers, and distributors. There will be a pardoned and paroled television series showing what reentry success looks like. And we will deliver a college-accredited podcast training incubator that feeds our audio production pipeline for years to come. There's a lot of opportunity zones that we could plug our people into. Our ambition is to erect a digital humanities installation within a university library that will house all of our carceral testimony, our content, and partner with a university press to publish, distribute our anthology projects. We're currently working on 5 book projects. Our Bars anthology will be the definitive carceral rhyme book. Muzzled will deconstruct censorship throughout the carceral state, much like we talked about today. Dark Garden will present a coffee table anthology of non-rhyming carceral poetics, examining mass incarceration matched with original art pieces in collaboration with MFA artists around the country who support this work. Pen Pushes Anonymous will present an anthology of all of our journalism work with commentary, and Urchin Poems will present my personal poetry chapbook. I invite every artist, musician, academic, educator, author, filmmaker, activist, lawyer, abolitionist thought leader, carceral studies historian, and justice impacted returning citizen who cares at all about human rights, equity, and state power to consider collaborating with us. Your participation is what inspires and changes hearts and minds. If you'll indulge me, David, I want to acknowledge the folks who helped us get here. I'm grateful to you and Sophie for giving us leash to show what we can do and supporting this effort when I know it costs you time, money, and bandwidth that are in short supply for everyone. We don't have to imagine the freedom of speech anymore because through the Los Angeles Vanguard Social Justice Desk and you, we have it. Thank you, Benjamin Franklin, for inspiring our writing and building an organization that has afforded me, along with the Mundo Press, a public-facing staff role inside the Ben Free Project and allowed us to craft and shape the curriculum, the programming, and the grant packages that serve our community. Thank you to all the interns at UCLA and the Social Justice Desk there with the Vanguard who've helped us build a solid foundation. There's a small but activating Bars Behind Bars grant package we wrote ourselves that is now sitting with the Poetry Foundation's equity and verse staff that speaks to real possibility for these workshops that we now have deployed at 11 different prisons in California. That's real stakeholder agency. Thank you to Dr. Randall Horton for offering me the rare opportunity to be in your orbit, man, and represent your mission and occupy a seat on Radical Reversal's board of directors, while studios in Alabama, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Oregon thrive, while expansion plans to target California and substantial funder partnerships are forming that will amplify the innovative work you and Devin have pioneered in order to deliver technology to incarcerated creators like us. It's a true honor. Thank you, Leah Silverman, the Columbia University School of the Arts, MFA Society, and all the folks who evaluated our work for the Incarcerated Writers Initiative and published us in the 4th installment of the Exchange Annual. Thank you to Dr. Lauren Boasso, the Writing Center Director at the University of New Haven, and the editors of the Journal of Prison and Education Research at VCU for inviting me to present my incarcerated contributor perspective as a teaching artist practitioner via the paper that they'll publish soon. It's the first time the journal has made such an overture. Thank you to Kate Meisner for editing the sentencing guide we use daily in our work and rocking my poem live from UCLA's Ackerman Ballroom stage during the Unchained Voices Restorative Justice Festival, which presented the inaugural Bars Behind Bars poetry contests throughout the state, thanks to generous financial support of author, professor, and curator Adam Bradley's Rap Lab. I send my thanks to Open Campus journalist and College Inside editor Charlotte West for being a real one in the space who never flaked, didn't try to polish my hood vernacular, and taught us how to work without permission in the state. I want to thank Saul, Guy, Muna, Sarah, Aru, and everybody at Luna Saul for bringing art, story, and healing into our lives, as well as a credit-earning nodule that gets folks home sooner. Thank you to Dwayne for entrusting us with your Freedom Library in order to develop what will become Freedom Reads, the Books That Liberate podcast. Thank you, Fritzy Hortzman, for entrusting us with your Trauma Talks curriculum in order to develop the Trauma Speaks podcast. Thank you to Ben for supporting our development of the Inside Knowledge podcast, exploring the college lives of folks in and exiting prison. And thank you, Randall, for allowing us to develop Radical Versus the podcast. These verticals, they represent, David, the future of Inside Out community building that uses technology to harness our stories. Respects to Common, Calvin, Marcel, Syrup, Dre, the Rebirth of Sound team from Chicago for sitting in rooms with us to chop it up about possibility. And of course, man, mad gratitude goes out to Scott Budnick for staying in the lives of so many of our youth offenders and through them, making so many of these engagements happen for us. For the early days, Richard Cabral to Common to Saul to now steering the Kardashian family. Like, that dude is truly a special human and uniquely visionary for harnessing the power of celebrity and media to situate iconic personalities next to a societal problem that needs engagement, compassion, and normalcy to invigorate the change that we need. Nobody on the planet has impacted more incarcerated lives than that guy. Dating back to Governor Brown's administration, using legislation and activism to save an entire generation of forgotten kids. We thank him, we thank God for him, and everything that the ARC does. I want to tip my cap to Rebecca Silbert, who along with Debbie Mukamal built the nonprofit architecture that became the blueprint for how we even have access at all to free college education in California's prisons, and how I finally got to graduate after 30 years of trying. She now steers those verticals from within CDCR's Office of Correctional Education, and it's changed all of our lives in a way she will never get the proper credit for it. We hope she solves that riddle for our peers who lack a Social Security number too. Thank you to Governor Newsom for standing in our C1 Honor Dorm Day Room here at DSP and telling us it's the place to be, for appointing a secretary who looks like he really believes in the mission, and for funding service providers that are staffed by former lifers like us. We urge him to support the arts and staff the Art of Recovery Therapy ILTAG here so we can get to work and function after 4 years of dormancy. And I want to thank everybody who looked into a camera and said, bars behind bars, freaking read, I got you. Because when our guys see that, it matters. I want to thank all my peers who bravely lean in every day to this thing we call change. It's on us to save our lives and tell our stories. And last but not least, David, to Elizabeth Alexander and the Andrew Mellon Foundation. Your fingerprints are literally everywhere around here. You know, so many of the folks who have delivered resources to us, stood in rooms with us, and who have been enabled to do so thanks to her and their vision and their commitment to the Imagining Freedom Initiative, which really encapsulates everything we hope to do. The community we serve is that Trayvon generation that she writes about, and I'm convinced that they won't ever be allowed to become the bastards of this or any other era, not as long as her keen eye keeps a lookout over us and them. So thank you for prioritizing the bodies in the margin, funding the geniuses who have already planted seeds here, and inspiring us to believe we could use art to write our histories. We hope to write a history with her one day. If indeed we all are, as Gwendolyn says, really flowers in the human garden. This work represents the oxygen of my life, David. I die without it. If we don't get it right, we'll continue to prematurely wilt and lie down and chalk outlines they have planned for us, man. Agency is activating, but distribution makes agency matter. When we no longer have to fight just to try, like the little kid who used to watch it, we get to abide what Yoda said, because then there will be no try. There'll only be you. We got lots to do. So thanks for having me, David. Check us out on benfreeproject.org. Follow us at benfree and log on to davisvanguard.org /track our work. You can email me at ghostwritemike@benfreeproject.org. And follow our workshop at Bars Behind Bars _ That's BARZ behind BARS _ For everybody listening on the Dovo, we see you because we are you. Peace and blessings, y'all.
You've been listening to Everyday Injustice. We've been talking with Ghostwrite Mike out of Valley State Prison. This is David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system. Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com.